Welcome to the Northeast Video Study Guide. This is going to be for both the vocabulary test and for the picture prompts, and I'll go over those in a little more detail at the very end of the study guide, but the vocabulary test is going to be on Friday, December 11th, and your picture prompt test is going to be on Wednesday, December 16th. We had three major topics for the Northeast. The first was immigration. The guiding questions we had for immigration on your sheet, which is in your notes, is why was the Northeast a major entry point for immigrants? And what is the connection to the water features in the Northeast? How did this affect the economy of the Northeast? What happened to the cities of the Northeast as a result of immigration? And what may have been the story of the journey of the folks in this picture? And the one vocabulary word we had was immigrant, and the definition for that was a person who comes to live in a country from another place. So we'll take these questions one by one. The first one, why was the Northeast a major entry point for immigrants? Well, that's because it was close to the Atlantic Ocean. A lot of these immigrants were coming from Europe, and they were coming by boat, so they're coming across the Atlantic Ocean to get here. So that's the connection to the water features. Plus, there are already a lot of big established cities in the Northeast, like New York and Boston and Philadelphia, that were good places for immigrants to settle. This affected the economy of the Northeast because of the fact that now there were more and more factory jobs that were available. This also encouraged the more construction of more factories to produce more goods, and more jobs were created in the Northeast. And this, of course, increased the populations of the cities as well. So that next question, what happened to the cities? Well, their populations went way up. And big cities that may have had 50 or 60 or 100,000 people if you were in New York, pretty soon had in the hundreds of thousands and into the millions. New York, I think, had 3 million people by the end of the 1800s. And then the story of the journey of the folks in the picture, we read Watch the Stars Come Out, which really focused on a girl about your age coming across the Atlantic Ocean and the hardships that she endured on the boat to get to America. And then we also read the story Pepe the Lamplighter, which kind of went through the immigrant experience for a lot of folks once they got to, in this case, New York City, but the Northeast in general. Our second topic was trade and transportation, and here were our guiding questions for that. Why was the Northeast an important region for trade? How did the movement of goods change forever in the Northeast? What water features were important to trade and transportation? What land features got in the way? And what cities grew because of trade? And then our vocab words were canal, lock, and port. A canal is a ditch dig across land to connect one waterway with another. A lock is a water elevator used to raise and lower boats, and a port is a place where ships load and unload their goods. And all these definitions are on the website. They're also in your notes, and in your notes you wrote down definitions in your own words, and you guys did a really good job with that. So you can also study your own definitions. And the ones that I'm reading, the ones that are on the web, will be the exact ones that are on your test. So again, taking these questions one by one. Why was the Northeast an important region for trade? Well, for a lot of the reasons that we just talked about. There were a lot of cities that were there. There also were a lot of bodies of water, which we'll get to in just a moment. And it was becoming a center of immigration. The movement of goods changed forever in the Northeast because of the Erie Canal and the canal system in general. And now all of a sudden you can move goods over longer periods or longer tracts of land and do it a lot quicker and for a lot cheaper. And that's because of the water features of the Northeast. So the water features that were important were, of course, the Atlantic Ocean and the Hudson River, which was connected to the Atlantic Ocean, and the Great Lakes like Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. But the big one we focused on was the man-made body of water, which was the Erie Canal, which connected Lake Erie to the Mohawk River. And then the Mohawk River flowed to the Hudson River, which flowed to the Atlantic Ocean, which connected all those places to the rest of the world. The land features that got in the way were parts of the Appalachian Mountains and some hills that the engineers who designed the Erie Canal did a pretty good job of getting around, and they used those locks to raise and lower ships safely through the areas that were still pretty hilly. They weren't going directly over the mountains that required way too much work, and really for the technology they had was not possible to go over a 3,000 or 4,000 foot mountain, but they could go over a 200-foot hill by setting up a system of locks. And then the cities that grew because of the trade were, of course, New York City, which was already big and was growing. Buffalo was another big one that grew as a result. But you also had a lot of smaller towns like Rome and Utica, which you see there in the center of the map, which were very small towns that actually grew into decent-sized cities during the time when the Erie Canal was used quite a bit. And then the one that we talked about a lot was Lockport, which is all the way out there in the west, on the left of your map. And you can tell just by the name of the town that that's a town that grew because of the canal. It's just a combination of the words lock and port, which again were two of your vocab words. And you can even go outside of New York State and talk about the growth of cities like Cleveland and Detroit and Chicago, because those were also cities that were on the Great Lakes that were now connected to the Atlantic Ocean and therefore the rest of the world. And the picture we looked at the most for this was called the Locks at Little Falls. And this, you can see pretty much everything that we've talked about. You can see the canal and how it's been dug. You can see the donkeys there on the towpath that would have been used in the old times of the canal to drag some of the barges and the ships through. You can see the locks right there in the center. And Little Falls kind of became a port because this is where ships were unloading and loading goods on the barges. So all three of your vocab words you can connect to this picture. And finally, we had industry and resources, and our guiding questions. How did the Industrial Revolution change life in the Northeast? How did rivers help the growth of the factories? What natural resources were needed so the human resources could manufacture the capital resources? And that's kind of a confusing question. Who was working in the factories in the Northeast? And then how does the factory system affect you in 2015? And the vocabulary words, we had a bunch for this section. We had textile, natural resources, capital resources, human resources, factory, and manufacture. And we said a textile was a type of cloth or woven fabric, so basically what they were making in the factories, in the early factories. A natural resource is something from nature that people can use, such as trees, land, water, animals, minerals, etc. In this case, the natural resource that we talked most about was cotton. A capital resource, these are tools, buildings, machinery, money, and any other goods people make and produce to produce goods and provide services. So that's really anything that's being made from the natural resources. And some will give you a definition that is just when you're making tools, and others will just say anything that people can buy would be a capital resource, anything that is made from a natural resource. A human resource, these are the people needed to grow, make, and or sell a product or service. So basically the people who are doing the work, whatever that work might be. Lots of human resources in a factory, which is a building or group of buildings where goods are made or assembled, usually by machine. And the machines and the machinery have gotten much more advanced through the years. And then manufacture is the making of products on a large scale, usually using machines. And we talked about the roots of that, the FACT meaning to make something, and then the MAN of manufacture meaning to do it by hand. So taking these questions one by one, how did the Industrial Revolution change life in the Northeast? Well, you have a lot of people who are now working in factories, which were not working in factories before. So it offered a lot of different job opportunities. You didn't have to work on the family farm anymore. You could get a job working in a place, making an hourly wage, and you really didn't need to be tremendously skilled. This wasn't something you spent a long time studying. A lot of times you were trained on the machine very quickly, and then you could work for years and years on that same machine. The rivers helped the growth of factories, not in the way that we ordinarily would have thought. It did help for trade and for transportation, but in this case, it was also the power source. So rushing waters, like we see here, Pawtucket Falls, would have been used to turn wheels, which powered some of the simple machines in the early factories. So it was really the power source that made the machines work. The natural resources that were needed, so the human resources could manufacture the capital resources. That's what we just kind of talked about. So that cotton would be the natural resource. The people who you see in this picture were the human resources who were turning that cotton first into thread. And you can see in this picture, they're taking the thread and making that thread into cloth, and that's on a loom. The cloth would be a capital resource. The thread would be a capital resource, and anything made from the cloth would be a capital resource. The machines, the lights, those are all capital resources because they are made from, at some point in time, made from natural resources. Who was working in the factories of the Northeast? Well, you see them right here. Mostly women, mostly, in some cases, young girls. The story that we read, which was the Bobbin girl, Rebecca was just 10 years old, but most of the workers were between 15 and 20 years old, and again, mostly female. You do see one guy in the picture, if you look kind of in the center there, but most of the ones who were working in the factories were girls. A lot of the overseers and the supervisors, and I'd say probably all of the owners, were males. And how does the factory system affect you? Well, there's Pawtucket Falls again. How does it affect you in 2015? Well, the school bell schedule that you follow, to a lesser extent at Belmont Station, but where the one you'll follow next year at Trailside or whatever middle school you go to, and down the road in high school, those are all kind of trace their roots back to the factory system and the factory bells that would ring to let people know where to go and when to go there. So that's something that's been kind of borrowed from the factory system, and it was really used to get kids who are in school used to a bell schedule, because a lot of those kids were eventually going to work in factories. And finally, your two tests, no sweat. It almost rhymes. Almost. First one, your vocabulary test, which is December 11th. You will match your term to your definition. So there's going to be 8 definitions. You have 10 words. The reason why I'm doing it that way, you'll have all 10 words in a term bank. So this way, if you miss one, it doesn't mean you miss another one automatically. So this way, it lessens the likelihood that you'll get 2 wrong. If you mix one up, doesn't mean you'll necessarily miss another one. So, and then you'll match at least 3 terms to a picture. So there's going to be a picture. You have to look at the picture and then write down 3 terms that you can connect to that picture and then explain why. And that kind of gets you ready for the picture prompt, which is, I'm sorry, that's not open notes, which is probably obvious. The picture prompts, which will be on December 16th. There will be 3 pictures. You're going to look at those pictures and explain how immigration, trade and transportation, or industry and resources connect to the picture. It's very possible that you will look at a picture and be able to connect 2 of those things, and possibly all 3, and that's kind of where you get more credit. You can look at a picture and just connect immigration, and that's fine. That would get you a 3. You start getting into the territory of getting a 4 when you can connect in some way 2 of our topics to a particular photograph, and that is going to be open notes. Hope this helps.